Greetings, lovers of lore, and welcome to another installment of the Timestream Chronicles, and a special early greeting to all of my patrons. Thank you for supporting my channel. I hope you enjoy the early access. So in the previous installment of the Timestream Chronicles, things got insane, and Urza ended up tumbling down into the Phyrexian Rift, and all kinds of madness ensued, with, at the end of that episode, Urza coming up somewhat triumphant while Carrick had escaped his grasp, but Urza still firmly located within the rift. Now the story continues, where in the previous episode we mentioned how Karn started barreling down the hill after Urza got sucked into the rift, and after Baron flew off, Karn basically decided he was going to head into the rift. So at this point, we are with Karn, and he is falling into the Phyrexian fast time rift. Now this experience is very disorienting. Immediately upon entering the rift, Karn could no longer tell up from down. He had no concept of time, even though he literally had like magical chronometers, whatever you want to call them, like even within himself. He had no concept of time. He started to heat up as he fell through the rift, but luckily for him, he actually fared much better than Urza because he was specifically designed. His silver golem body was specifically designed to withstand temporal stresses originally, and it had been improved over time with all of the different experiments that Baron and Urza had undertaken. So as a result, Karn was actually pretty well suited to this task of making it through the rift. So Karn ends up heating up a bit, but other than that, he falls through the rift without much of a problem. The real problem for him was how it felt once he got through the rift. Suddenly, he was inside of the actual Phyrexian Gorge, which was a horrifying experience for Karn, but not for the reason that you or I would think. The reason that he was horrified was because there was a horrible sense of rightness to the gorge. When he looked around at all of Phyrexia, all the rot and the Phyrexian smell of oil, just the desecrated gorge, he knew that it resonated within him. There was something inside him that connected with this environment, and it puzzled him. It left him confused for a moment until he realized that his emotional cortex, the thing that makes Karn Karn, that basically turned him from a regular beast of burden into a thinking, feeling being, that core was originally a Phyrexian heartstone. So he is part Phyrexian, and all these feelings are flying through his mind as he is still plummeting, right? He falls into an oil-filled lake. At this point, it's not having too much of a, like, the oil itself isn't really having an effect on him. The bottom of this lake that he's in is just filled with bones, just layers of bones upon bones. That's not the only thing that's in these waters. There are actually ravenous hordes of Phyrexians, different varieties, that lurked just below the surface. They're sitting there bumping into his legs and just kind of trying to gain purchase by trying to sink their fangs into Karn's feet and things like that, but since Karn is a giant silver metal golem, they're having no effect as Karn's just kind of looking around. He knows Urza's somewhere in the rift, but he's not really sure as he just kind of surveils the area, looking around until his eyes settle on a gigantic storm of silver. And clearly that's where all the falcons that had made their way into the rift had ended up. And so Karn, following the logic that all of the falcons seemed to be in one area, right? These falcons were specifically designed to seek out Phyrexians. Now, if all the falcons are located in one part of the gorge right now, that part of the gorge absolutely has to be where Urza is. So Karn slowly made his way through the bone and monster-filled water that really just, all it did was slow him down, right? Urza, however, was in a much more dire situation. Last time, we were leaving off with him being mostly triumphant, but at this point, instead, it's the falcons now are mostly gone. He has not managed to track down Carrick. There were tons and tons of negators that are still around. Urza had destroyed as many Phyrexians as he could, but there was still tons of them around. His enchantments were depleted. The artifact creatures that he had summoned up to help defend him had all been destroyed. And yet there were so many Phyrexians still. They were swarming him, and he wasn't sure exactly how he wanted to handle it first, but he firmed up his resolve and decided that the only thing he could really do was accept that this was going to be the end of him, and that he was going to make the Phyrexians here pay dearly. He was going to sell his life for as many of theirs as absolutely possible. Now, as Urza prepared himself for his last desperate stand, there was a movement of silver that he saw out of the corner of his eye, but it was too big to be a falcon. It turned out to be Karn. Karn had made his way to the arena where Urza was located. And as he's making his way through, he's basically like a locomotive, just moving down the tracks. Nothing could stop him as he moved inexorably towards Urza. He's just tearing off pinchers and other limbs from Phyrexians, just decimating them with his gigantic silver golem fists, right? Karn obviously at this point is no fan of Phyrexia. Even though he feels a resonation with the location, he is disgusted by Phyrexians at the same time. That's an interesting level of cognitive dissonance to have to deal with, especially when you're a construct that can't heal mentally the same way that flesh and blood beings can. We talked about that actually in a previous episode. So the Phyrexians realized the threat that Karn posed, and they turned to him and they started trying to swarm him under, right? They were just like, okay, if we're not strong enough individually, we'll swarm him. So they pile onto Karn, and Karn just throws them off of him. There's literally nothing at this point that can stop Karn from making his way to Urza. Now, as this is happening, as Karn gets closer to Urza, these charges start raining down out of the sky, and they start breaking apart. All kinds of pieces of them are ripping into different Phyrexians. Now, the Phyrexians' oily blood is kind of, there was already a bunch in the arena because of what was going on, but even more is being added to it, and these charges are starting fires all over the place. And at this point, Urza looks upwards, and because they're in the fast time rift, everything outside the fast time rift moves at an incredibly slow rate. So to him looking up, it was just like a painted picture, right? Up in the air, it's this static figure. It is the ornithopter. Now, Urza surmised that it was being helmed by Baron, right? Which clearly it was. Baron had run off and hopped in the ornithopter as soon as Urza got sucked into the rift. And actually, when he looked a little closer, Urza could see that there was something silver that was uncoiling its way from the bottom of the ship. And all of a sudden, boom, it's down there in the rift. Dangling a few feet away from him was a silver rope extending all the way up to the ornithopter. So Urza here, thrice saved by silver. First the falcons, then Karn, and now this silver rope. So as Urza notices this rope, he actually feels Karn step up behind him, sweep his gigantic golem arm around Urza, and with the other hand, he grabs onto the rope. They start getting lifted up out of the rift, and as this is happening, obviously the Phyrexians in the rift are very upset about this. They're throwing whatever weapons they have at them, firing arrows. Now, this is doing absolutely nothing to Karn, right? Karn's just like, ping, ping, just falling back, and it was a waste of their effort. For Urza, he was actually having these things embed in him, and it did require him using a force of his own will to push all of this stuff out of him. But because Karn was holding him and the rope, Urza could just focus essentially on healing himself over and over and over until they ended up getting so high up that even the few functional ballistas that they had left wouldn't be able to reach them. So basically they end up pulling their way back up through the rift. You know, it's a big struggle going up through the rift as well, but they've both been through it before. For Karn, it's less of an issue, and because Urza doesn't have to focus on movement or anything, he's able to just keep himself formed without much of a problem. So they fly away, the rift shrinking behind them, Phyrexia shrinking or the Phyrexian Gorge, I should say, shrinking behind them as Urza is basically lamenting. At this point, he is just full of regret because in his eyes, the idea was to wipe out basically their hatcheries, everything that was used to create more Phyrexians. He wanted this to be a complete cleansing of everything within that gorge and the end of Phyrexia. But ultimately, all he did was make the situation worse because Phyrexia can make use of all the bodies that are left over, right? That's no issue. They're back into the flesh vats, all that sort of thing. So all Urza really did was give them metal and power stones because every one of those falcons is made out of metal along with the power stones, right? And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these falcons had been released into the rift. So as Urza lamented about giving them those resources, Baron grimly piloted the Ornithopter away. He was fully aware of what was coming next. There would be a full-scale war between the inhabitants of Teleria and the inhabitants of the Phyrexian Gorge. This would happen within the next 10 to 20 years tops, which is not much time considering that Carrick and the Phyrexians in the Gorge would have 100 to 200 years of time to prepare and use all those shiny new power stones that they had just acquired. So the next 10 years at the Telerian Academy was spent preparing for this inevitability. A new hall of artifacts that was partially designed by Karn was used for a number of purposes. They had exhibits, but the exhibits, unlike the previous hall of artifacts, weren't just discarded designs that Urza wasn't using anymore. They weren't deactivated units. Essentially, they were active units that went on voluntary deactivation to be part of the setup there where students could study them and learn about them, but it didn't have that same kind of feel to Karn. So it's a nice nod that over time Karn is having more influence over what's going on and they're treating him more like a person, right? Then that extends obviously to other constructs at the Academy also getting the same kind of treatment. So this part of this new hall of the artifacts, it functioned as a laboratory, a repair area, an assembly line, a tutorial hall. Like it had a number of important functions, and they even kept all the invention schematics and blueprints, plans, all of that stuff available in this area for all the different students to study, and even the constructs themselves, the artifacts, were able to go and look up their own schematics as well, in case they wanted to understand their own function better. That's a cool little modification to how things operated. So this location also functioned as the military command center for island defense specifically. So as a result, they had Telerian runners and scorpions set to actually guard that specific part of the school. And then they had basically the total amount of defenders for the Isle of Teleria was 500 large artifact creatures, which would be your Telerian runners and your scorpions, your pumas, those, right? 750 new falcons have been constructed, 30 ornithopters, and even a new hot air balloon, like the gigantic one they had before. All of this stuff had been built and put in different locations. So to protect the school, which needed, I mean, the most defenders were required for the school. So they specifically took 200 of the 500 artifacts, the larger ones, and stationed them nearby the school. And then the rest were spread around the island. So within a fast time rift, really close to the academy, they posted 100 of these artifact creatures. Now, because they were in a fast time rift, they could essentially respond before an attack had really time to commence. As soon as any kind of Phyrexian threat shows up, they're able to respond instantaneously, essentially, right? Now, the problem with this is because they're in a fast time rift, they end up taking a lot of wear and tear. Like over time, things degrade. Well, they're in a fast time rift, so they're degrading much faster than things would in regular time. So as a result, these artifact creatures that were stored in the fast time rifts, they were rotated in and out of the rifts on a daily basis, right? So they were the immediate, like short-term immediate defenses. And then for longer-term defenses, there were 100 more of these artifacts that were stored in slow time, where they were only rotated out twice a year. And then the rest of the artifact creatures were just spread across all of Teleria. So basically, in the next moment of the story that we're in, 10 years have passed since that rift event. All of these defenses have been constructed, and Urza's gathered his senior staff together in this tutorial hall area, all right? So they can go over their plans. So Urza starts to talk about how over the past 5 years, they've managed to stop 5 Phyrexian incursions, destroyed over 1,000 Phyrexian negators, to give you an idea of just how ramped up this has become. Remember, 10 years ago, we're dealing with a scenario where they had found like 1 Phyrexian coming up from the top of a waterfall, and now thousands of negators are able to like boil up out of that gorge and cause problems. Now, Urza is saying that the current setup they have is sufficient to repel Phyrexians, but insufficient at this point to wipe them out. It's good enough to keep the school safe. Now, the people assembled are all the higher level mages at the academy, and then some of the individuals that we've been following in the story, like Joyra, Teferi, Karn. These individuals are here for this briefing as well. Now, Joyra was getting impatient with what was going on. Basically, everything Urza's saying to us, we already know. So she stands up and she says, look, Urza, we already know this. We know what the deal is. And Urza says, I hope so. I genuinely pray that you fully understand this, because I'm leaving. And at this point, everybody assembled there, with the exception of Baron, was stunned. It's like, wait, you're leaving? Where are you going? What's going on? These concerns started getting voiced by Joyra specifically, because remember, Joyra still has some rage simmering under the surface towards Urza for the fact that Teleria got destroyed and all of the things that have happened. She bears her own responsibility and guilt in this, but Urza ultimately did the most damage. There's no disputing that. So you're essentially, you're going to abandon us, or you're not here to take care of the academy anymore? What's going on? Baron stands up and says, Urza's heading off on academy business. He's reviewed the defenses. Everything is sufficient. We're going to be fine. Now, Joyra, she's like a dog with a bone on this one. She's like, no, he has unfinished business. And Urza speaks up saying, I get what's going on. You're just trying to remind me of my pledge to basically like fix my wrongs, right? But here's the thing. You're very young. All of you here really are young compared to me. You have no concept of the damage that I have done, like overall. Forget just Teleria. And then he pulls out a map of the Phyrexian Gorge, like from a pull down section, boom. Here's a map of the Phyrexian Gorge. And it's got like the detailed areas stressing the ever-growing threat, right? So Urza reaches up and he just tears that map down. Now behind it, there's a bigger map. And it's a cross-section of a bunch of circular-looking planes that are nested in each other like nesting dolls. You know, have you ever seen those? They're little wooden dolls. You crack them open and there's another little wooden doll version and it just keeps going on like that. It's that kind of concept, but instead it's basically made up of different planes of existence. 9 different stacked planes inside of each other. This is Phyrexia, a map of, forget the Phyrexian Gorge, this is where Phyrexians come from. So this basically, the top layer humans can survive in. It's the only layer humans can survive in, and they'd only be able to survive for a few hours. The place is full of dragon engines, some of which are as big as 500 feet tall. And that's also where they kind of scrap and throw the junked creatures that don't matter. So any creatures that aren't functional, that haven't really been recycled into something else, are roaming around on this top layer. And any of those basically make our runners, our scorpions and all those, look like children's toys in comparison. And that's just the top layer of Phyrexia, all right? There are dense forests made of poisonous metallic plants, lightning storms constantly blasting a soot-filled sky, and each layer down gets worse and worse, with demons, witch engines, lakes of poison, acid, and fire. And at the very center in the bottom, nestled at the bottom of this, is the greatest evil that's ever faced any civilization, any world, any plane of existence. And as Urza's talking about this, the people in the room are getting more and more nervous, especially when Urza got to this point, and Baron's face is just ashen. He is just white-faced, and he whispered something nobody else in the room could hear, but it was a name even Urza is afraid to say, and that name is Yawgmoth, the master of Phyrexia. So the rest of the people in the room could literally feel the dread coming off of Baron. It was palpable, right? They just this terrible moment. So Urza breaks that moment by continuing, saying, I've brought this evil here to Teleria. Before that, I am responsible for an entire plane of angels getting wiped out by these. I was responsible for the Ice Age on Dominaria and the destruction of Argoth. The entirety of Argoth was destroyed because of me. And even before that, I'm responsible for reopening the world of Dominaria to Phyrexia. Carrick is a horror, but he's only one man. What Carrick is to Teleria, this evil is to the world, to the multiverse. To basically, to be able to battle millions of Phyrexians, we need better tools and weaponry. There's no way what we have is sufficient. And at this point, everybody in the room is silent. There are no complaints. Joyra's stunned by all this. After a few moments, she actually musters up the ability to talk, and she says, how can this all be your responsibility? How can this be like up to you? No man could be responsible for all this. You'd have to be Urza and then she just kind of cut off. Because up until this point, remember, for the story's purpose, I had been using the name of Urza throughout this whole story, right? But Urza had been masquerading under the name Malzra. So everybody up until this point, I mean, Baron's the exception. Baron and Karn know the truth. But the majority of people, including Joyra, just know Urza as Malzra, right? Just a really powerful, really rich, eccentric mage who has a special learning academy where they're studying temporal magic, all that kind of stuff, right? This is the moment where Joyra and the surrounding people actually, it clicks in their mind that they're not dealing with Malzra. This is literally Urza Planeswalker, the one who is responsible for so many insanely consequential events happening in Dominaria. His name is a curse to a lot of people, right? He did destroy all of Argoth. He did usher in an ice age that caused so many people to meet their ends, right? He is a formidable godlike being with insane power, and he has caused so much havoc in the world. So this is an absolute stunning moment for Joyra, right? This is Carrick's a horror that he's got to deal with, but it's nothing to the fact that the real horror he has to deal with is on the level of God. So this is all settling in on the people who are assembled, and they realize the gravity of their situation and the power of the individual that they have been dealing with, thinking it was just another almost everyday person, right? So basically, Joyra at this point says, where are you going? You can't be going, you're not going to Phyrexia, are you? At this point, Urza says, no, not at all. And he starts to walk over to Karn, and he starts to reach toward Karn's head. Now, Karn gets all paranoid and concerned and actually starts to lean back away from Urza. He does serve Urza, but he's also worried that Urza may just still consider him a construct that he can do whatever he wants with, and he's afraid that Urza's going to open his head latch and take out his personality matrix. Now, that concern was for nothing, because Urza was actually reaching for the necklace that was around Karn's neck. We talked about that earlier in the story. It's made out of that special Gitu metal that was so strong that it scratched Karn's frame without much effort at all. So Urza lifts the necklace, and he turns to Joyra and says, I'm heading to your homeland. I'm going to Shiv. Urza's journey to Shiv was incredibly relaxing for him. There was no need to feign humanity for him. You would be surprised at how much effort it took to feign humanity. All the tiny little details that went into remembering to blink and breathe and eat and brink, whatever that is. Okay, so all these tiny little minute details that go into making you human, right? Because remember what I just said, he was masquerading as Malzra, who was considered to be a human. So he would have to deal with people inviting him to dinner and doing everything that's necessary to make it seem like you are indeed a human being, right? Otherwise, that would cause big problems. So it was a very tedious but time-consuming sort of thing, you know, and also, obviously, it was necessary. He had to do it. So he just kind of settled in and dealt with it. But now, on his way to Shiv, he was free to let all of that go and not worry about it. That was dispensed with. So he arrived at Shiv at night. The mountains were framed against the night sky. There's all this lava going around. Some of it's flowing in rivers. Some of it's shooting up into the sky, sending giant chunks of rock flying everywhere. It's a pretty inhospitable locale. The air is hot and noxious. Urza just decided to take a test breath. And taking one breath in and feeling how noxious the fumes were, he decided to himself, it truly is wonderful to be immortal. So as Urza hung above Shiv, he started to modify his gear to match the harsh terrain. The robes that he was wearing shrank down into leather that was enhanced with drake feathers that were designed to reflect heat away from him. The sandals that he was wearing turned into thick leather boots, and even his hair braided itself tightly against the top of his head so that stray hairs would not get burnt off by all of the wonderful, wonderful lava and fire that was surrounding him. So he descended down through the sulfur clouds, landing near a magmatic sea, just within view of where he was intending to go. His destination was the Mana Rig, which was this massive, massive Thran construct, okay? Now, the Thran are an ancient race of people. They're actually who became the Phyrexians, okay? So this is essentially pre-Phyrexia Phyrexian technology. And the Mana Rig is actually comprised of two massive cities on top of a number of other parts of the facility. So you start with the two cities. They are both set above heat shields designed to protect them from the lava. One of these cities is actually hung out directly over the lava pit, and the other is tucked back in the other direction. They're basically like a line across from each other. So one of these cities was an ancient monastery. That was the one that was tucked back, like in the more safe location. And the city hanging over the magma sea was actually a city and also a colossal forge. It was a gigantic Thran forge. This was used to create the Gitu metal of that necklace that was gifted to Karn, otherwise known as Thran metal. So between these two cities stretched a gigantic storage and production facility. And then underneath all of that was this gigantic series of interlocking tubes that, they weren't currently doing this, but Urza, understanding artifacts when he sees them at a glance with his planeswalker abilities, understands that the series of these tubes were designed to draw lava up. It functions almost like a heart, pumping the lava up out of the lake below and directly up into the facilities so that it can be used as part of the forging process. Now, all over almost every inch of the Mana Ring, there are all these like scratchings of Thran writing. Now, Urza thought it was fitting that he was going to learn the secrets of the Phyrexians to defeat the Phyrexians, right? Because at this point, that's what he's doing. He originally, at one point, thought the Thran were a completely different race of people who were against the Phyrexians. But at this point, he had realized the sad truth is that the Thran had willingly become the Phyrexians. So he wished to use their own powers to undo them. I mean, that feels right, doesn't it? if you look at the perspective, that actually makes perfect sense to me. So he's drawing into his mind how this entire rig functions. He's very pleased to have located it because he's going to be able to produce Thran metal on a greater scale. Now, he could just instantly move himself inside the Mana Rig, but he decided that he wanted to basically walk the mile over to the Mana Rig. Well, technically it wasn't a mile. The Mana Rig was a mile away in a direct line, but because of all the different lakes of like lava and all these sort of hazards, it actually turned the walk into a 5-mile walk. But Urza's perspective was that walking the land is how you know the land. And like take in the mana rig from the perspective of the people who built it, right? The Thran weren't people who were flying around or whatever. They were normal, sentient, bipedal individuals who would view the mana rig basically from down on the earth, right? So Urza decides he's going to wander the path of the inhabitants to help know their perspective as well. You can learn a lot about a society depending on a number of different factors, right? So as he wandered the worn down smooth trails on his way to the mana rig, he started to feel the presence of other life. Along the hills, there were hidden nests, some better hidden than others. The ones that weren't that well hidden, some of those had actually been burned out. You could see burnt craters in the hill where clearly some of these hideaways had been destroyed. The better hidden ones would be more difficult for inhabitants of the plain to detect. However, for Urza's powerful Planeswalker Gemstone eyes, it was nothing to see every single little hidden nest and realize that they were indeed goblins. Now, from Urza's perspective, goblins are worse than rats. So once he had gone ahead and actually managed to claim the mana rig for himself, he intended to bring back some of those scorpion constructs and just wipe them all out. It wouldn't do to have them causing damage to the mana rig or coming up and being problems in any other way. So Urza wandered the path without anything really. He noticed nothing came out to greet him, no life forms whatsoever, although he mused that might have something to do with the fact that he did just descend down from the sky. If anybody had seen him up there just modifying his garb and then descending from the sky, that's not an everyday occurrence. So they may be staying away simply because that's the smartest thing to do. So since Urza was essentially alone, there was no one else to talk with, his mind wandered, and now his mind's so complex that at the same time it's actually noting out where all these different goblin nests are for like future taking care of them. But his mind wandered to all the different writing of this Thranish nature all over everything. And that, of course, thinking of Thran led him to thoughts of Phyrexia, and thinking of Phyrexia ultimately led him to thinking about his brother Mishra. And his brother Mishra had lost his life in the Brothers' War before Urza even became a Planeswalker. Mishra essentially had given himself over to Phyrexia. So that sort of thing still troubled Urza thousands and thousands of years later. The pain of losing his brother never went away, and I will be covering that storyline. And in one way, I do regret not actually covering the brother storyline and them growing up before doing this part, but that we've already crossed that bridge. So I'm just going to continue on here, my friends, and we will definitely get to it because it's fantastic. All right? So Urza's distracted now. He's thinking about the Thran, Phyrexia, he's thinking about his brother, and because of the natural camouflage of the inhabitants of Shiv, he almost didn't notice when a bunch of Viashino had moved into the path to block his way. Now, he was aware of them, but that was really close to him absolutely having no idea they were there. So, quietly, these lizard men just filed their way onto the path, their scaly skin gleaming with the reflected light from the lava and the fires, and they stood there for a moment until the largest Viashino, these are lizard men, the largest Viashino moved forwards with his polearm held out between him and Urza. Now he stared Urza down with his unblinking, inhuman eyes. But Urza understands how living beings work in certain ways pretty well. So he could see in the lizard man's eyes there was fear and resentment. And at the same time, as the lizard man moved forward, he started to hiss at Urza. As soon as he did, Urza's mind started running through 3,000 years worth of different languages that he had picked up from different worlds and different places, and there was no match in his mind for the language. But that actually wasn't a big stumbling block for him, because he essentially was still able, he can instantly absorb any language he doesn't know just listening to it being spoken. So as he did that, he was able to make out that the lizard man was saying, Gitu are forbidden this high. Now, for Urza, understanding languages doesn't mean you're fluent in it. So you can listen to somebody else speak it, no problem. But speaking it back can actually be fairly difficult. So Urza actually thought for a second, wait a minute, should I have brought Joyra as a liaison? Like, she could have talked to these guys. She's from here. She could have handled this. And actually, I could just go and planeswalk and grab her now. But the lizard men looked kind of nervous, and they're all sitting there like holding their weapons really tightly. And Urza realized there was just too much potential for some sort of injury to occur. So it would be better to not bring Joyra into this scenario. He ultimately decided that he would just do it himself. So he said, do I look like I'm Gitu? And the lizard man says, all right, well then who are you? He says, I am Malzra. So he's still pretending to be somebody that he's not. Come to see the mana rig. The lizard man stamps his polearm down in the dirt and says, it's forbidden. And Urza responds, I must see it, and you can't stop me. The big lizard man says, you know what? You may be right about that, but you know who can stop you? Our champion. And at that point, out of behind the Viashino, this giant mass looms up. This thing is the size of at least 8 to 10 lizard men just when it's hunched down. So the lizard men move aside, and a drake comes lumbering forwards. A Shivan drake on all four comes lumbering forwards with a menacing grin on its face, showing giant monstrous teeth as it moves forward. Its scaled body had some kind of leather harness on it. Was this just some dumb animal? That's what Urza's initial thoughts were. Is this just some mindless drake? That won't be that big a deal. I can see these leather harnesses. What do? Just have this thing pull around big pieces of machinery or rocks? And so a moment later, Urza could see in the drake's eyes that it actually had a fair level of intelligence, and that was reaffirmed when the drake stood up to its full height and spoke. I am Ramadaragas, champion of the Viashino. Are you feeling so arrogant now? All right, my friends, that ends this installment. Urza versus the Drake will be covered in the next installment next Sunday. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to support it, consider joining my Patreon. I really want this channel to become a long-term thing, and getting Patreon support is how I make that happen. So, thanks for coming by, everybody. And remember, lore is life.